This is Common Knowledge, a Magic the Gathering podcast about improving at the game with a focus on pauper play. It's not about the cost, it's about the knowledge. Welcome to Common Knowledge. Here are your hosts, Brandon Clark and Lobbert. Enjoy this week's episode of Common Knowledge.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 15 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon, and joined with me is the elegant Sean the Lobbert.
Your intros are always so nice to me.
Oh, that's because you're the sweetest.
How are you this week?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Good. Just had some froyo.
Whoa.
I love some cold gummy bears.
Oh, froyo. I like froyo. Every time I hear the word yo, I think of the Vine about the yo-yo man. Or the yo-yo master.
Huh?
You've never seen that Vine?
No.
Like, make me a yo-yo man. But the yo-yo man wasn't listening. He just kept on yoing, and it's this dude with yo-yos. You've never seen that? No? Alright. It's like my favorite Vine.
I'll have to watch that after the show.
Have to. But every time someone says yo, I always think of like, so when you said I ate froyo, I wanted to be like, make me a froyo man. But Sean didn't listen. He just kept eating froyo.
I do have to say that I actually despise the word froyo. I know it's shorter. Frozen yogurt is fine. It's just like a weird little I don't like saying froyo. Anyway.
Well, it's not a silly to say froyo too. And I always say frozen yogurt, but anyway, well, that's like way more exciting than my day. I just got home from work and for the last 3 days, I've just been binge watching Jessica Jones season 2 on Netflix.
I've seen most of the first episode of season 2.
Did you watch season 1 at least?
I did, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
It's good.
Yeah, well, season 2 is pretty good too. I like it. I think that it's season 1 and season 2. They're both still probably, besides like Daredevil season 1, the best Marvel on Netflix. Best like Marvel series.
Oh, I was gonna say, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is on there.
No, yeah. I like Guardians 1 better than I like Guardians 2. I really like Guardians 1, and I think it's only because the opening credits have Chris Pratt kicking space rats around.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
I think that just makes it better than any Marvel film they'll ever make.
Are you ready to get on to the show?
Yeah, let's get on with the show. But first, let's give a quick shout out to our sponsor, puremtgo.com. Check them out for awesome magic-related content in the form of articles, podcasts. You can find deck lists and check them out. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so on patreon.com/common knowledge. And check out all the other podcasts in the Constructed Criticism Network. Check out Constructed Criticism, the namesake podcast hosted by Spencer Howland, and the limited time only podcast hosted by Spencer Howland. And you can find some other awesome Magic players hosting or helping host, talking, being on the podcast. You've got Danny Cathro, a good Magic player. I don't know if he's got a pro, I don't know if he's still silver. I don't think he actually is, but maybe he is.
Still probably very good.
Yeah, he's pretty good. He does things like top 8 GPs and stuff. Or at least 1 GP. I don't know. He top 16 to Pro Tour, okay? If that's not good enough for you, then go listen to the Game podcast.
I don't even know what that is. Don't tell me.
I'm not going to tell you. They don't get any more notoriety from me. Anyway. Sean, what are you playing?
After last week's show where we beat up on Scred Delver the whole time, I wanted to give the deck a spin, see if it was, just this powerhouse that I believe it to be, and I took it through a league without any prior playing. I played like one tournament practice game, and I want to say that I got like land screwed, and I didn't do that well, and then I started tilting. Like there was a point where I could have countered this. It's the red curse, the curse of the
Pierced heart.
bloody heart, yeah. And I just hit F5, went straight through it, and then I just from there on out I tilted. I couldn't draw good hands, and I was doing a video and I just scrapped the video because I was ashamed. So I know that the deck takes a lot of skill. I still want to say it's super good, but other than that, I'm just working on my blue-white Delver deck. It's making progress. It's pretty neat. What are you playing?
Neato. Well, I am still playing Scred Delver, Blue-Red Delver, but I took Mono-White Heroic for a spin, mostly just because Spencer had started a league with it, and I just was going to finish the league.
How'd that go?
Well, Spencer went 0-3 in the league, and I went 0-2. Yeah, I actually think I could have won one of the matches, but I misplayed incredibly horribly, like embarrassingly bad. Like I did silly things like... So this is the one I'm most embarrassed about. My opponent, I have a 5/5 flyer, right, with lifelink, and I have the 3/2 protection from monocolor, or the 2/3 protection from monocolor. And my opponent has a Thraben Inspector. That's it. And 1 black mana up. Because I think he cracked a clue, and then he just had 1 black mana up, I think. So anyway, he cracks his clue, and then he goes to combat, and then he attacks me with his Thraben Inspector. And I don't even think about it. I just block. I'm like, that's a weird attack. I don't know what kind of combat trick he would have that would kill my protection from monocolored creature.
Yeah.
So his Thraben Inspector dies. He's playing Black-White Pestilence, by the way.
Yeah.
So I'm sure all the listeners at home already know what's coming. Because I knew what was coming. I went block and then went, oh. He taps his black mana after damage resolves. And he Tragic Slips my 5/5 with lifelink.
That's pretty bad.
That was pretty bad. And then the next big mistake I made, I had lethal game 1, and he had a single black mana open, and I could win if I gave my big creature protection from white to attack through all of his creatures. But I was afraid of his 1 black mana, like that was going to blow me out. Now, remember, my creature is like a 6/6 or something, so like a Disfigure is not going to kill it. Morbid had not been triggered, so a Tragic Slip wasn't going to kill my creature. So instead I go, well, just to be safe, I'm going to give my creature that has Shamano's Blessing on it, giving it protection from black, protection from white, so that I'm covered on both bases.
Mm-hmm.
And it also had an ethereal armor on it. And I think 1 other enchantment too, to make the beats even worse. So he had 3 white enchantments on this creature, right?
Yeah.
And I gave my creature protection from white.
And what happened?
I lost!
All the enchantments fell off.
Fell off, and I went, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna blame that one on just, solely that I'm an idiot. And, I 100% know that interaction. Like, I don't know. I've just never played a deck where I put enchantments on my creatures. And so I'm sitting here going, okay, well, I've got this thing to give it protection from white, and I'll just alpha swing. Oh, let me put it on my creature that has protection from black just for an extra cushion. And then all my enchantments fell off, and I just went, oh.
I think if there's a moral of the story for the What Are We Playing segment, it's practice your deck before doing a league with it.
Yeah, don't do stupid things. Don't give your creature protection from white when all your enchantments are white in your deck. But anyway, my opponent was really cool. His MTGO username was Giraffe, and he's actually listened to the show a few times.
Nice.
So it was really cool to kind of chat with him, and he was an awesome opponent. And anyway, shout out to him. So
Yeah, if you ever play against either of us, give us let us know. I mean, we're not going to give you anything, but it makes us feel like
It's just for
somebody.
solely for our validation.
Yeah, and we'll give you a shout out on the show. How about that?
Yeah, there you go. Now you're famous to the world, Mr. Giraffe. And you beat me in an embarrassing fashion. You destroyed me.
Yeah, it's the worst.
But yeah. Anyway, I think he crushed me like game 3 though. Like it wasn't even close, which I think is the way that matchup should go. Like black white pestilence versus white heroic. Anyway, I finished that league off at a nice 0-5 and then started a new league with Scred Delver and I'm 0-2, so or 2-0.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
0-2. Oh, nice.
I'm very proud of my 0-2 performances.
With the deck you actually know.
I'm 2-0. But yeah, with a deck I actually know, and with a deck that it's easy to get wins with. Well, that's all I got for What Are You Playing? So let's transition into the next segment of our show. Card of the Week.
This
Sean,
week,
tell us about the card of the week.
This week I chose the card of the week. I chose Freed from the Real. So if you're not familiar with Freed from the Real, it is 2 generic mana and a blue for an enchantment. It has pay a blue, untap enchanted creature, or pay a blue, tap enchanted creature. And the reason I chose this card is because I've been seeing a lot of the Walls deck pop up for some reason. I can't figure out, I've looked for articles or videos on why this deck would suddenly be popular, but I can't really find any. If you know why, email into the show, please. Anyway, Freed from the Real is definitely a cool card. It pops up all the time in infinite combo decks in Pauper. So how it works is you have to have a creature that can make blue mana, and it has to make at least 1 blue and then another mana. And you can go infinite with it, make infinite mana, and then, you have to have something to do with that mana. So a couple of the cards that it goes infinite with are Axebane Guardian, as long as you have 2 walls. Oasis Ritualist, which you can exert to make 2 mana of any color. Another infinite combo is if you enchant a land to make more than 1 mana, and then you animate it to make it a creature, and enchant it. So you'd need something like, usually it's Wind Zendikon or Lifespark Spellbomb. You can go infinite that way as well. They're usually really fragile, and they've never been tier 1, but I think they're super cool. Usually the payoffs for those kinds of decks are like Valakut Invoker, which you can pay 8 mana and do 3 damage to target creature or player. And then recently the Walls build got Lead the Stampede, and they've just been playing like Mole Drifter, and so they can get Drift of Phantasms off the Lead the Stampede. So I think it's more of a cohesive deck than it used to be. So maybe it's just that they're figuring out that they have the cards now. The other infinite combo you can do is if you put Karametra's Favor, which is the enchantment that you enchant your creature and it can make 1 mana of any color, and then you draw a card. And if you put that on Servant of Timerit or Night Market Lookout, you can just tap the creature for mana, untap it with the enchantment with the mana you just made, and do that over and over. And both of those creatures have, either when you tap it or it becomes untapped, you either deal damage to your opponent or leech a life, so you just kill them on the spot, which is the best infinite combos, is when you just kill them on the spot. And then it does have the bad option of you can enchant your opponent's creature and tap it down. Other than that, there is an enchantment in blue that every time a creature is tapped, then whatever creature you enchant is tapped, you draw a card. So you can kind of make this cool draw card engine that way. But I've never seen that actually used. It's not very good. Any thoughts on Freed from the Real?
I think it's really cool too. I really like this deck actually. I like combo decks that can attack from many different angles. And so like the addition of Lead the Stampede, Jotty Offshoot, I think have really kind of helped give this deck a little more stability. And then Oasis Ritualist, which is an extremely difficult creature to kill because it's got 4 toughness, and then it's also a very powerful ramp creature. It kind of makes your plan B of cast Mole Drifters really good, because you cast your Mole Drifters, have a ton of mana to draw, and you draw all your cards, and you can kind of do that, and then then you have the plan of just like win with Karametra's Favor plus Servant or something.
Those are separate decks, by the way.
Oh, are they? They don't
Yeah.
put them all.
Usually the Walls deck is just the Walls strategy, and maybe they'll do an Oasis Ritualist, and then the Karametra's Favor is like just a fringe like tier 3.5 deck that people experiment with.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, I just assumed they were on the same thing. But yeah, I think that probably the best version then is the version that is trying to just make infinite manas.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I think it's cool, and I think that it's worth checking out if you're interested in some fun fringy type of decks, especially deck that can attack on multiple different axes. Plus, like the just cast Mole Drifter is usually just a solid game plan anyway, right?
Yeah, and yeah, I do end up using the card of the week segment to spotlight a card in a deck that I kind of want to just be like, well, look out for this deck this week. It's kind of weirdly popular, and I think this, like, it just folds to Swirling Sandstorm. I haven't seen any counter magic out of this deck, and you can cast Swirling Sandstorm a lot of the time and just wipe them completely. Not that you should be slotting up any more Swirling Sandstorms because a Walls deck is around, but anyway.
All right, cool. Well, let's just move straight on then into our main topic for today. So our last episode during the power rankings, that was our last episode, right?
Yeah.
Cool. We kind of talked a lot about the Delver Menace and discussed whether or not banning was needed, or if there was something we could do to try to remedy the format, if there was a deck that could fight it. And we kind of both settled on Boros Monarch being the answer. And I think the last 2 weeks of challenge results kind of proved that point. So today we are gonna talk about the Boros Monarch deck, and we're gonna discuss what makes this deck tick, how it fits in the meta game, and then of course we're also gonna get into how to beat it if you want to continue playing your Scred Delver deck or whatever you're playing right now. So let's just get a quick summary then, Sean. What is this deck? Where did it come from?
So Boros Monarch is a kitty deck. And if you don't know what kitty means, it means you're trying to trigger either enter the battlefield effect or leave the battlefield effects with like bounce creatures such as like Core Skyfisher. And the reason, if you don't know why it's called kitty, it's because back in 2013 there was someone named Turbo Kitty 3000 that in the early part of the year, at least according to my research, started playing a deck similar to this, the Kuldetha Boros, and they did well in some Pauper dailies back when we didn't have challenges and stuff. And Boros Monarch is basically, after we got Monarch and some other cards, the better version of the deck, and so everyone kind of just moved over in this direction. But it uses the same package of bounce creatures. Originally it was using Kuldetha Rebirth with Ichor Wellspring, but now it doesn't need those 1/1s. It's not so much of just an attack you deck. It's moved more into a mid-range deck because it has a better engine. And that kind of gets me into what this deck is. It is very much a mid-range deck. It has 12 or more kill spells and a very strong draw engine. It's burning out your creatures, and it flies over you. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, this deck I think of this deck sort of as like the Jund of the format. Like I feel like this deck does very Jund things. It has efficient creatures, efficient removal, and it has this form of card advantage. It's not even real card advantage, with the exception of the Monarch. Like, that is definitely real card advantage. But a lot of its card advantage is virtual card advantage, in the form of just getting incremental value off of your other artifact spells, and like bouncing your spell and recasting it for more value.
I would say that's actually real card advantage, and like you play a Glint Hawk or a Core Sky Fisher, and you draw a card with that, and so you're kind of 2-for-1ing your opponent in that they have to deal with that now, and you've gotten your card.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so their threats generate more advantage, and then their threats also have to be handled, which still generates you advantage because your opponent's still down cards from you. And so, yeah, I just like this deck, and I like a lot of what it's doing, and it seems to match up very, very well with a lot of what's going on in the Pauper meta right now. But,
yeah, it's gaining. I think it's gaining popularity with good reason. It doesn't. It uses artifacts for synergy, but it doesn't rely on artifacts, which is, you can't really rely on artifacts reliably. That was a weird sentence. Because they can be hated out. You can attack the artifacts in this, but it's not maybe the best way to deal with it sometimes.
Well, should we just get into the deck list then? And
yeah. So the deck list we're using is from March 11th, 2018, the victor of the challenge, Pascal 3000, which I found interesting because Turbo Kitty 3000 originally made the Kuldetha Boros, and Pascal 3000 he's playing this deck all the time, I feel like. So I don't know if there's something about the number 3000. Maybe it's the same person. Maybe the Illuminati are real. I don't know.
Confirmed. Yeah, it is kind of interesting. Or I wonder if it's just got something to do with the number 3000, like you said. Maybe there's like a secret cult of red-white mid-range players who live together in secret and make sacrifices to the Core Sky Fisher.
But it's possible. It's possible. We're not ruling that out yet.
It's quite plausible, actually.
I wouldn't say that.
Cool. Creatures. So, like we were saying, this deck plays just a collection of the most efficient creatures that it can, and creatures that generate it value. So we've got 4 copies of Glint Hawk, 4 copies of Thraben Inspector, 4 copies of Core Sky Fisher, and this last number tends to fluctuate between 2 and 3, but that is Palace Sentinels. So I guess let's just start with the Glint Hawk. This is where a lot of the artifact synergies of the deck come into play, with the Glint Hawk needing to return a permanent you control to your hand when you cast it or you sacrifice it. And this is what gives you a lot of value with your artifacts. You're able to bounce your artifacts and replay them again to get more value later. And we'll talk more about what those artifacts are and how they fit into the deck. But Glint Hawk I think it serves 2 very major roles. The first role, obviously, is the synergy with the artifacts. And the second role is that it's just a 2-powered 2 toughness creature, which I think is even more important, the 2 toughness than the power. And it flies.
Yeah, the flying, I think, is the best part of this creature. I mean, it's super good that it returns that artifact.
Yeah, the flying and the 2 toughness are, I think, what makes this creature as powerful as it is.
Yeah, it does really everything. Like, if you need it to come down turn 1 and you have an Ancient Den or something, you totally can, and that's not super uncommon, just to prevent as much damage early, or block that Fairy Miscreant.
Yeah, I think that if your opponent doesn't have red mana in their deck, that is a very viable play. I think that if I can find out that my opponent has red mana, and certainly in the dark on the play, I don't know that I would ever make this decision, because that tempo hit can be pretty bad if your opponent has a removal spell for Glint Hawk. But if I do know what I'm playing against, and I know that that's not going to be a huge liability, making a 2-powered flyer on turn 1 can be very powerful.
And it does also do the same thing as Core Skyfisher, in that if you're not going to make your land drop, it's free if you have one of those artifact lands, because you just bounce your artifact land and replay it, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's true too. Giving you a pseudo land drop of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Next creature on our list is the Thraben Inspector. So Thraben Inspector is a 1/2 for white, and Thraben Inspector says when it comes into play, investigate, which means you get a artifact thing.
A clue.
A clue. Oh, is that what it is? A clue. That's what it's called. A clue. You get a clue that you can pay 2 generic mana to sacrifice to draw a card. So this card is kind of just like a 3 mana cantrip of sorts. Really
you
nice.
can't spread it out over 2 turns, which is really nice.
Yeah. You don't have to pay all mana up front, and you can spread this out. You can play your Thraben Inspector on turn 1 and not crack your clue until turn 5. Which is nice. Plus, the fact that the clue is an artifact does give it synergy with Glint Hawk. I don't know that bouncing your clue is always what you want to do, but it's there in a pinch.
Yeah, but usually it matters more for Galvanic Blast. You just get Metalcraft so you can do that extra 2 damage. And that comes up a lot, actually.
Yeah, so Thraben Inspector provides tons of synergy. And again, it's a very efficient creature.
Mm-hmm.
2 toughness on a body is very relevant in this format, even if it doesn't fly. It means that Thraben Inspector can still attack very profitably into your opponent's board of Spellstutter sprites and Fairy Miscreants.
Yeah, the amount of times it blocks or prevents the attack of a 1 toughness creature is that comes up a lot.
It's a very good card. I like him. So next card is sort of the namesake card of the deck, Palace Sentinels. It's a 2/4 for 3 and a white, and when it comes into play, you become the Monarch. So basically, this means at the end of all your turns, you draw an additional card. Unless your opponent can deal you combat damage, then they steal the Monarch away from you. But this deck is built around keeping the Monarch, and Palace Sentinels himself, or their selves, I don't know what gender Palace Sentinels is, but Palace Sentinels, as a 2/4, does a really good job of not dying to Lightning Bolt. It will die to Scred and Galvanic Blasts, but your opponent's got to have 4 lands in play to kill him with Scred, and then they've got to have Metalcraft to kill him with Galvanic Blast. And it's possible to keep your opponent off Metalcraft if you can. Mm-hmm. And it just is really hard to kill. It's very difficult to attack into. I want to say that it's going to eat or bump with almost every creature in the format.
Most of them, at the very least.
Yeah, and there are very few that just outright kill it in combat.
The whole Monarch mechanic, when it first hit Pauper, I was so salty. I think I've brought this up on the show before, and if not, I'll do another rant here. It doesn't feel Pauper to play a card and then end up drawing 8 cards off of it. And even after you remove the creature, the Monarch persists, and it's just this new mechanic of the game that you can't interact with. You can't bounce the Monarch token. It's almost like a Planeswalker emblem that you get in Pauper, and that felt wrong to me. I'm so used to it now that I'm not salty about it, but it's such a powerful effect that it just feels weird.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't play a lot of Pauper before the Monarch. I played a little bit, but not as much as I do now. So I guess I never really knew what the good old days were like before Scred Delver and before the Monarch. But it does feel like it's a little too powerful.
It
just
feels
feels
like
like
it.
very,
It does
very.
have like you can lose the Monarch, and then all of a sudden your opponent is doing such crazy things that you just shot yourself in the foot. But that's usually a desperation play. And then, not to mention, a lot of your removal in this deck in like Galvanic Blast or Lightning Bolt, some other instant spells you have, you draw the card at the end of your turn, which is supposed to be like the drawback of it, of like you don't get to play it yet. You can totally still play that card. I've watched people more than I've played this deck, but I've seen people just, oh well, I'll play the Monarch and they're probably gonna hit me. Oh, I top decked Lightning Bolt. Guess I'm not losing Monarch this turn.
Yeah. So, last card on the list. I wanted to save this one for last just because I personally think that it's the best creature in the deck. I think that it's one of the best white creatures in the format.
Yeah.
And it just does so much for this deck. So I'm kind of saving the best for last. Core Skyfisher. So we got a 2/3 flyer for 1 and a white that when it comes into play, you return another permanent you control to your hand. Is it permanent?
It is permanent.
It is permanent. Okay. So why is this card great?
So, first off, I'm going to cover the bouncing ability. It's just fantastic. Most of the time that just says draw card. Even if you do it on like Thraben Inspector instead of one of your 2-mana artifacts that draw you cards, that's like 3 mana draw you card, which isn't much worse. It can act as pseudo vigilance for other cards, and then the toughness on this creature. Oh my gosh, the toughness on this creature. For 2 mana, a 2/3 flyer is just it's just so great. If you haven't cast a Core Skyfisher, it stabilizes you. There's a lot of bears you need to deal with in this format, and it trades with Delver. I can't say enough.
But not only does it trade with Delver, but it feels favorable when you trade it with a Delver.
Why?
Like you've already gotten so much value out of it, and now you're eating their Delver too.
Yeah.
That just feels like one of the ways that this deck pulls ahead. Like I know as a Delver player, if my opponent has Core Skyfisher, I am not offering the trade. I mean, in very rare circumstances, like unless I've like got the win, I am not going to offer the trade until I can find a way to kill the Core Skyfisher. Like it just puts the Delver players so far behind if they do.
And the deck a lot of the time functions like you kind of just wait and wait and wait. You don't attack with your creatures, but then all of a sudden you'll have this opening and you have a whole bunch of flying attackers. You can attack with this into like Mole Drifters and things. And that's usually not something you can do profitably. Core Skyfisher is kind of an exception there. Unless you're playing like a sideboard card.
So that's the creature suite of the deck. Glint Hawk, Thraben Inspector, Core Skyfisher, Palace Sentinels. They all have a common trend, right? They all generate value of some kind, and they all are efficiently costed in terms of power, toughness to mana cost.
Yeah, the deck does function a lot like, play a bird, bounce an artifact, play an artifact, draw a card, play a bird, repeat, repeat, repeat.
Yeah, draw more cards, play more birds, bounce more artifacts, draw more cards.
Let's move on to the instants and sorceries. I'll go down this list. We have 1 Electrickery, 4 Galvanic Blast, 4 Lightning Bolt, 3 Prismatic Strands, and 2 Battle Screech. So I'm going to start at the end of this list. So the 2 Battle Screech. These are also fantastic cards. If a lot of the time you can get your opponent to make bad trades with their burn spells because you go to cast the Battle Screech, and if they have a Thraben Inspector on the field, you can't give them priority. So they have to bolt your Thraben Inspector before these land, and then at some point in the game, a lot of the time you you get those other tokens anyway with the flashback on this card, which is just tap 3 white creatures. All of the creatures in this deck are white, so that comes up super often, and the card makes 2 on its own.
Yeah, you literally just need 1 creature in play when this spell resolves, and then you have 5.
It doesn't even have to resolve to have that second ability happen a lot of the time. And it holds your Monarch really well, and a lot of the time it wins you the game. These 2 Battle Screeches make 8 power just with these 2 cards. And then there's this Singleton Electrickery. This is kind of just an answer to the metagame, I feel, in just mainboarding this instead of sideboarding it. Elves it's like a 50-50 matchup, and this will increase their percentages against that, and it's also
in the favor of elves, though, just because they can have very explosive draws that are hard to handle for a mid-range deck like this.
I've asked around because I was curious. I asked Methodical, who is pretty good at Boros Monarch. He's pretty good at the game in general. I just asked him in a YouTube comment, and he basically was like, it's about 50-50, and that's kind of where I was putting the matchup in my head. They can target the elves that matter most, and none of the creatures in Boros Monarch can really be blocked. So you can put a quick clock on them, and then transition your burn spells from taking out important elves to taking out their face pretty quick, as long as they don't have like a Well-Wisher or something. But you can also handle those a lot of the time. Also Electrickery is also great against the fairy decks that we have, any kind of Delver variant. It can be cheap and just kill one of the fairies so that Spell Stutter doesn't work. I'm sure it doesn't take a genius to figure out why Electrickery is good against them.
1 damage lines up very well with 1 toughness, right?
Yeah, and it does find... yeah. It does find uses in, like, the weird, like, Boggles matchups where all of a sudden you're really glad you have this Electrickery if you can 2-for-1 them when they're trying to enchant their creature, or 3-for-1 them if they have 2 Boggles out. Bogles, sorry.
Bogels.
And, you know, even burn, you can kill their Firebrand Archer. I think it's worth mainboarding this, like, 1 Electrickery. That is one that does come in and out of the deck list, though. Next up, we have 4 Galvanic Blasts. This is the 1 mana instant, deal 2 damage. If you have Metalcraft, deal 4 damage. Metalcraft is pretty easy in this deck list to hit. Super early turns, you don't really need it, and then usually by turn 2 or 3, you'll have the Metalcraft, and you can deal with pretty much everything. And not to mention, the 4 Galvanic Blasts represent 16 damage, if my simple math is right. Next up we have 4 Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt is just a good card. All of these spells so far are working at instant speed, except for Battle Screech. They work fantastic with your Monarch. You can point them at the face. Same thing as Galvanic Blast. It's all of your creatures are really flying over. You can clear a path super easy, and they help you maintain the Monarch.
I think I'm seeing a trend here.
Yeah, it's
so far.
Maintain the Monarch, because eventually you'll outvalue your opponent. The last one we haven't talked about is this Prismatic Strands. Prismatic Strands, he has it at 3, but usually I see 2, and then they put the other ones in the sideboard.
I think 3 is becoming a lot more common, though.
Yeah, definitely. It helps you maintain the Monarch, but it's also just a huge blowout a lot of the time. Like, you just attack in with a bunch of creatures, and they're like, oh, roll their eyes, I have to block like this. And then you Prismatic Strands them, and they're the only person that loses creatures. Like, a one-sided Fog with Flashback is just great. Yeah. It helps them live. to the point where they can get more removal a lot of the time against like Stompy and things. And it does have these cool interactions where like the second time you cast it, it's just tapping a white creature. So you don't have to tap mana the next time. So you're free to do things like cast your Palace Sentinels. And the one thing I wanted to note here is that when someone casts Prismatic Strands in combat, the first thing I wanted to note is you don't name the color until the spell resolves. So if they have it on the stack, usually that's when you want to burn their creatures, because once it resolves, even if you counter it, they can flash back that Prismatic Strands at instant speed. So like that's when you have to use that spell. They could name red. They probably won't. It's usually
the color of the creatures that are blocking their own creatures,
but if you stack it weirdly, a lot of the time they can flash it back and get even more value. So they're killing your creature and they're countering your spell that's killing yours. So it just compounds and it gets like, oh man, this spell is so good. Like it just sitting in your graveyard a lot of the time will generate value in them just not attacking or something like that.
Yeah, it's the blowouts for sure. So let's move on to the artifacts of the deck. And these are not really the engine of the deck, but kind of the engine.
One of the engines, yeah.
I feel like the Monarch token emblem is sort of your engine, but this is kind of the gas, the fuel, I guess. It kind of helps get you there and pull ahead of your opponent to the point where you can become the Monarch and then just seal the game away. So I think probably most of the decks we play or see play this configuration, but it's typically 3 copies of Alchemist Vial and 4 copies of Prophetic Prism. Prophetic Prism is a 2-mana artifact that when it comes into play, you draw a card, and you can pay a generic mana, tap it to filter a mana, essentially, so add whatever color of mana that you want. So this card play has a lot of great synergies in that this deck is very red mana hungry, but it plays a lot of white spells. So it's very important for this deck to have a lot of white sources so that it can cast all of its creatures on time, and being able to still like cast Prismatic Strands and stuff like that. But then it also at times like you just need to have 2 or 3 red sources, and that can be incredibly difficult to do. And Prophetic Prism sort of helps mitigate the issues with the mana base.
The consistency this adds is huge. Usually, like, Pauper's a format where playing a second color is a huge decision. You can't just play your fetches and shocks, and this just smooths that out. Most of the time you are casting white spells, so we have to put a lot of white in the mana base. And then you'll have these turns where you have to cast, 2 or 3 lightning bolts in a turn. And Prophetic Prism just lets you do that while drawing you cards.
Yeah. It works really good with like the Boros bounce land to do something like that. Like if you need double red, you filter your white mana into red, and it just really helps clean up the mana base and add that consistency. The second artifact that is played in this deck is called Alchemist Vial. It is a 2-mana artifact. When it comes into the battlefield, you draw a card, and you pay a generic mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to have target creature not be able to attack or block this turn. So this is a great artifact in this deck because, 1, it draws you a card, so synergy with all your bounce permanents. You just draw more cards. And then it helps you do 2 things. It helps you sort of set up that Alpha Strike turn that you were talking about, where it just sort of builds up all its creatures, just almost creates just like a pillow fort, right, of big toughness creatures hiding behind its lightning bolts and its galvanic blasts. And then it just cracks a couple of Alchemist Vials, lightning bolts a creature, and all of a sudden
skies are clear.
Yeah, your skies are clear and you're taking lethal damage. And then it, of course, in a pinch, you say a creature can't attack you, and sometimes that's enough to like bolt a creature, vial your other creature. I'm still the monarch for another turn. Hopefully, I'm going to draw something that can get me out of this mess.
Yeah, and that means you'll get two draws if you have that monarch. 2. And you preserve your life total. I love Alchemist's Vial. It doesn't even feel that bad when you sacrifice it. It sucks that it's not there anymore, so you can't bounce it. But usually by the time you're doing that, it doesn't matter.
Right. But you've already you're still just generating so much out of this card. You're paying 3 mana into it, essentially, to draw a card and remove an attacker or a blocker. Like, that's like a really good card in like draft or limited, right? Like remove an attacking or blocking creature for a turn, draw a card for 3 mana. That seems like very reasonable in limited. But this is broken up over multiple turns, so you're not paying 3 mana up front. You're 2 mana now, and then 1 mana later. Well, you can still use the rest of your mana very efficiently, and then you have the synergy of being able to like bounce it. So like the rate on this card is absurd, I think.
Yeah, there is, I think, a skill ceiling, I don't know what to call it, on Alchemist's Vial. Knowing when your opponent is going to attack or when you can't stand to take that damage, because you do really want to save your Alchemist's Vials because they're such a valuable resource. But knowing when to like pull the trigger and just pop that Alchemist's Vial, that takes a lot of skill, I think.
Yeah. You say the ceiling's high, but how high is the floor on this card?
2 mana. You require 2 mana and you get to the floor.
Wow. Not a very high floor. This card must not be good.
Oh gosh.
Is that how I don't even know how I understood that anymore.
If you don't know what we're talking about,
probably don't.
Brandon and I used to do legacy commentary together for a local game store, and for some reason Brandon thought the power ceiling and power floor of a card were something weird, and I
remember how I had it mixed up, and I think the way I had it was it was like if the floor is high on a card, it means it's really good but hard to get there.
Like
I don't know what I was thinking. But anyway, I'm sitting here saying this, the floor on this card is really low and the ceiling's like incredibly high, and so it's like super easy to make good. Like I'm saying all this stupid stuff.
What got me was you were like, you have to climb up to the floor on a card to get it to.
I was trying to like explain the thinking, my thought process.
No, but it's like the floor on a card is the worst that it's going to be. And you were like, no, you have to climb up to the floor. And that's
the floor on a card is the worst it's ever going to be. So if the floor is very high, that means the worst it's ever going to be is really good. Right?
Well, yeah, the floor does need to be high, but you were saying the high floor was bad because you have to work more.
Maybe that's
it was really convoluted. Anyway.
But anyway, yeah, I'm sitting there going on about this for on the whole stream, and then finally Sean's just like, what are you talking about? What does the floor being high even have to do? Like, what are you saying? And I start like trying to explain myself, and I'm like,
it's going crazy,
climbing up to the floor, and chat's like, what are you talking about?
It's one of my favorite memories of that place.
Anyway, yeah, that was funny. But
so let's move.
The floor is very low or high on this?
I think the floor is high because it's a good card. You don't have to do much to make it good. And it does have a pretty high ceiling as well. Of you can make this card be amazing, and it'll redraw you cards with all your creatures, and it can prevent, like, if you prevent an Ulamog's Crusher attack with Alchemist's Vial, you're just like dancing. Like, screw the MTGO timer. It's dancing time.
Yeah. It is unfortunate that you can't use the Alchemist Vial and then sack it to the No, never mind. I'm a liar. Just don't disregard everything.
Okay.
I was going to say that because you still have to sack the Annihilator trigger, but you don't because it's not attacking.
Right.
I just got it confused with like fog for like a split second of like you're just fogging the attack, but you're not. They're actually not attacking you.
So I'm going to move on to the enchantments. There are 3 enchantments in this deck. They're all the same one. It's Journey to Nowhere. It is their. It's like the best removal spell in white.
Why would you want to go there?
Nowhere? You wouldn't. Your opponent puts your creature there.
Oh.
No one likes being exiled. Not even lepers.
Oh.
So this is their non-conditional removal. A lot of the time they end up digging to find a Journey to Nowhere. It does have some cool synergies with Core Skyfisher, in that you can snag a creature, bounce it. Like if you go to Journey to Nowhere, someone's zombie, and they sack it to Carrion Feeder, that's bad. Just pro tip, if someone's going to Journey to Nowhere one of your creatures and you have the opportunity to sack it, don't. The reason being, they can bounce it and just get another creature. If you leave it on the battlefield and let them exile it, most of the time that one counter isn't going to do much. Whereas them having nothing under their journey and just being able to go for it again and just bounce it, kill another one of your creatures, giving them a repeatable removal is much worse than losing whatever tiny creature you were going to. Just trust me.
And there's also some synergy there when it comes to like dealing with token strategies.
Yeah.
Of being able to sort of machine gun down their tokens with your Core Skyfisher bouncing.
It's a really slow machine gun, but yeah.
Yeah, very slow machine gun. So those are the enchantments. Should we talk about the lands?
Absolutely.
The manas. So we've got our artifact lands, Ancient Den and Great Furnace. Then we've got our dual lands, Boros Garrison and where's the other one? Windscarred Crag. And then the deck plays 2 snow-covered plains and 2 snow-covered mountains. And those are the main mana-producing lands. We've got Secluded Steppe. I guess that produces mana, but like that's kind of really there to cycle. It's nice because you can play it early and then bounce it again later and to get the cycle out of it, either with Boros Garrison or with your Core Skyfisher or whatever. And the last land in the deck, which I've never seen. You usually see Radiant Fountain in this slot, but Mr. 3000 here has taken all the Radiant Fountains out of his deck, and he's playing a single copy of Bojuka Bog. And at first I wasn't on this card. I thought it was weird and out of place. And then Sean convinced me that it was good. So I'm going to stop talking and let him convince you that it's good.
The reason I like the Bojuka Bog is it's better against your worst matchups. I think that the worst matchups for this deck are bigger control decks that often use the graveyard. You can get so much value just off of killing their graveyard. The incidental life gain, or the incremental life gain of the Radiant Fountain is nice. And I think the biggest differential, like the difference between the two, is that Radiant Fountain enters untapped. But the fact that you can exile everything out of like Tron's graveyard and then bounce it with Boros Garrison, both of the lands are really ability lands that you're bouncing with Boros Garrison. But there's just so many times where just exiling your opponent's entire graveyard with Bojuka Bog is just fantastic. As far as the artifact lands go, the deck very much does need them, in that they synergize really well with the Glint Hawk and the Galvanic Blast, in that it builds Metalcraft and you can bounce them for increased value. But it's one of the weaker it's like kind of one of the Achilles heels of this deck. You can if you have like a Gorilla Shaman or some kind of um,
Just a way to attack artifacts. You can.
yeah, you really have to be getting a 2-for-1. Like, oh, Gleeful Sabotage is the card I was reaching for. Blowing up 2 of these really puts the deck super behind since they need mana so badly, which is why they play so many Boros Garrison. Like, all of the creatures you really want to be... They're all 1 and 2 mana, but that's mostly because you're tacking on 2 mana with all of your Alchemist Vials, because you want to play them again before you play your next one. Because, where we said earlier, it's play a bird, bounce an artifact, play an artifact, draw a card, play a bird. You can't play a bird, play a bird, play a bird without getting into where you need to start bouncing your artifact lands. So this deck is very mana intensive. It wants to drag the game super out, and it can get to 9 mana and use all of it in a turn effectively. It's pretty nuts. Like, it can have no cards in hand and just draw, use all of its mana all of a sudden. It's crazy. Other than that, he has snow-covered mountains and snow-covered plains. There's no real advantage to that.
Yeah, it's just sort of a personal preference, I'm assuming.
Yeah, maybe the mountains make him fake out opponents and thinking that having them think that he's Scred Delver for a turn, which is a fraction of a percentage point. Maybe I don't think it actually does anything.
Maybe, I don't know. If I saw an opponent play turn 1 snow-covered mountain, I would also probably assume that they were playing Scred Delver.
Yeah,
and then I would assume that they were like color screwed and that they only had the 1 mountain and like an Ash Barrens. And so you might like play a lot differently, thinking that they're going to have a really slow, sort of clunky start, and that you could take advantage of that. So I mean, I don't know if it'll affect anything, but
yeah,
I know if it was me, that's what I would think. If I saw turn 1 snow-covered mountain go, I would go, oh, there's Scred Delver and they're about to cycle on Ash Barrens.
Yeah, really the only negative is that Ice Quake does an additional damage to you, but that's pretty narrow.
I think the upside of your opponent thinking that you're a color-screwed Delver deck is probably a lot higher than the blowout potential from Ice Quake.
Yeah, it's 1 damage to you.
It's very high.
Yeah, and they don't even really they don't want to target your mountain. They want to go for your Boros Garrison anyway. Anyway,
let's move on to the sideboard.
Yeah.
And I'll just go through this list really quick. So we've got 2 copies of Electrickery, 2 Gorilla Shamans, 4 Pyroblast, 1 Relic of Progenitus, 2 Lone Missionary, 1 Standard Bearer, 2 Core Sanctifiers, and 1 Reaping the Graves. So I guess we found a use for that Bajuka Bog.
In the Reaping the Graves? I've seen this in Boros sideboards before. I've never seen it actually played. Like, I think it's supposed to be against, like, maybe blue-black control, where you just want to blow them out with a turn where you Reaping the Graves for even, like, 3. Like, maybe bolt their creature on their turn and they played 1 spell and you Reaping the Graves. It can be bigger than that, but let's be realistic. It feels a little too cute. I think I would rather have an extra Standard Bearer or something if it were me. You feel about the same?
Yeah, I guess it's not terribly difficult to cast. You do have 5 black sources in your deck when you count the Prophetic Prisms.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't really know enough about the deck and the way the games play out. But this is probably also something that's like incredible against Delver decks. If you kind of like, unless the Delver deck can really sort of tempo you out, you're getting to this game state where both of you are sort of jockeying for resources until one of you is able to sort of just establish control on the board. which this deck is, I think, better at doing than the Delver deck, but the Reaping the Graves just gives them an extra endgame threat. Because, like, they can't counter it, and you're going to get back a couple of creatures. Like, I think that, like, getting back 2 or 3 creatures is not that far out there when you think that if you have 6 mana, you can go, play Core Skyfisher, bounce my Prophetic Prism, replay my Prophetic Prism, filter into black, cast Reaping the Graves. You get back 3 threats.
I'm going to disagree with you. The reason being, I've seen how this deck tries to sideboard against Delver decks, and it becomes difficult to take out cards. And you don't want this card gumming up your hand and then them just getting ahead of you. Putting in 4 Pyroblasts, which is what you do, and a lot of the time you don't even get to put in both of your Electricaries because you're already so strapped for things you want to take out of your deck. Like, you would have to start taking out, like, Palace Sentinels to make room for this. And I don't like that. Like, you can maybe justify taking out Journey to Nowhere, but I also don't...
I don't know. I don't really play the deck, but I feel like Palace Sentinels is a very big liability to have against Delver. Because they're one of the few decks that can steal the Monarch away from you easily. And if they can, that's a really... I feel like that's just like how you lose the game, is if you become the Monarch, or if you get bogged down with Palace Sentinels and you've played this early game of 1-for-1 and they've sort of tempoed you out and they've got a wider board, and it's like, I have to cast this Palace Sentinels to try to draw something, and then they're going to steal it from me the next turn. Like, that's a very common occurrence in these games. And so I think that, like, cutting a Palace Sentinels for a Reaping the Graves...
Okay, but I'm saying, like, you're already like, okay, I'll cut a Prismatic Strands. That's... It's pretty good, but maybe not in high numbers, because you might just have them and they'd be dead cards if you don't already have a board state. So let's cut one of those. Let's cut, say, 2 Palace Sentinels. I know that you cut all 4 of your Thraben Inspectors, so maybe you're right. Maybe there is room. You cut 4 Thraben Inspectors, Palace Sentinels, and then you've brought in 4 Pyroblast and Electricary so far. I would still rather find another slot with my, going down to 1 Palace Sentinels, bringing in another Electricary to maybe double up to kill the 2 toughness creatures, than trying to be cute with the Reaping the Graves.
Yeah, that's probably correct. I don't know. It's actually probably better to have Palace Sentinels over this card.
I think so.
The game plan is to bring in Electricaries and Pyroblasts.
Yeah.
You might just be right. This card just might be too cutesy, but
I think he put this in the sideboard thinking a lot of the same things like that, and like, I will find use for this. And then it just doesn't really end up finding that much use.
Yeah, I'd be curious to actually find out, 1, what the deck builder's thinking was, but 2, how it played out over the course of the tournament.
I do know that I've looked at some of his sideboards since, because I think he placed on the next week, on the 18th, and Reaping the Graves was out of the sideboard. He did change the deck a lot on that next week, so I know that some of this is experimental.
Yeah.
And I want to say that Reaping the Graves is an experimental card that is failed.
Okay.
Other than that, we have like the 2 core Sanctifiers. You can bounce, and they destroy artifacts. I know that you can actually bring them in against mono blue Delver just to blow up either a Curse of Chains or one of their Spire Golems. It's one of the better cards that you can hit enchantments with, especially since it is repeatable. There's the Standard Bearer. Obviously, that's for like Boggles, and you bring it in against elves, so that they can't use Timberwatch Elf. I would think I would just go down Reaping the Graves and go up a Standard Bearer, and then it's an extra guy if you're playing like a heavy removal deck or like an Edict deck. And then we've got like 2 Lone Missionary for life gain that's repeatable, a Relic of Progenitus. I assume that's for Tron, and maybe like the weird like Delve decks and stuff like that. 4 Pyroblast, obviously, for blue decks. 2 Gorilla Shamans for the Mirror and Affinity. Anything that wants to use the artifact lands is what you're bringing in Gorilla Shaman for. And then 2 Electricity, which we've talked about.
So that's the main deck and the sideboard. The 75 that Mr. 3000 chose to play with. Let's talk a little bit though about some of the cards that can vary and be switched in and out of the decks.
So the first is Seeker of the Way. I've seen Seeker of the Way played in this deck. I used to not be so big on it, but then I did watch Methonical's video. I've talked about him like 3 times because he's done some really great videos on this deck. I wanted to prepare, and he's super smart. And he plays Seeker of the Way in his list. He also plays Searing Blaze. Somehow he found room for all of those cards.
Yeah, I saw his Searing Blazes, and it was very interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty cool. Like, it makes the deck a lot more low to the ground and aggressive. So I think that's just a different mode for the deck. I think the Searing Blaze kind of the format of the deck is, I still think, better than Kuldotha Boros, since there's so many Electricity running around in sideboards right now that you don't want to be on a token strategy. Then we have Firebolt, which sometimes sees a 1-of in the main deck, just as like a value removal spell that you know you're going to get the mana for the flashback. I love Firebolt.
Next card on the list, which I don't even know if it merits a shout out on the list, but it's definitely something that people have played and it does show up. But it's a Sen's Enlistment.
Mm-hmm.
So Sen's Enlistment is 3 and a white, create 2 1/1 Kithkins.
Yep.
2, and it has Retrace, so you can discard a land from your hand to cast it from your graveyard. And the upside of this card is that unlike Battle Screech, which you flash back and it's exiled, you can do this repeatable times for however many lands you have, which kind of synergizes with your Boros Garrisons, bouncing your lands. You can bounce a land with your Glint Hog, your Skyfisher. So you can actually create a lot of tokens with this card. But I think the big outlier here is that these are just 1/1s on the ground. 1/1s on the ground, even if you've got 8, 10 of them, I don't think compare to 4 1/1s in the air in this format.
Yeah, just play another Battle Screech if you're looking for tokens. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. You do want your land, so I think the point where you would want to discard them to Sen's Enlistment is 7 or 8, maybe more, which isn't unreasonable. You can get there pretty quick, like turn 7 or 8 with this deck. Mm-hmm. But I think it's just being too cute, and the tokens don't actually end up being that valuable. Next up, we have Radiant Fountain. We did touch on this, and I think it's just meta-dependent. Radiant Fountain is the more common card to see in a sideboard. It's just better against aggro decks, and I think the logic is eventually you'll outvalue them with your Monarch and your value creatures, so you just need to survive longer. And then the Bojuka Bog is just kind of more power in the late game. So it's kind of like an early game versus late game trade-off here. And then I have seen people swap out a Journey to Nowhere for an Oblivion Ring. I can't say that I agree with that. It's 1 more mana, and I think it's kind of clunky, and the amount of non-creature artifacts that you want to hit is pretty low. I would say put it in the sideboard, but I don't even want to do that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that if you want this effect, just put it in your sideboard. I just don't think that there's enough non-creature permanent threats in this format that you need to deal with. You want to be killing creatures. That's probably the most important permanent type in the format. And you can do that with your Journey to Nowhere for 1 mana less.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of what I would want to Oblivion Ring. And some of the cards that are coming to mind would be Pestilence, Curse of the Pierced Heart. But again, I don't think that Oblivion Ring is where you want to be when you're battling against those two cards.
Yeah, Ancestral Mask, but that's usually too late since it's sorcery.
Yeah.
Pestilence is a good argument, actually. I think that's actually one of the better arguments, but those are fringe decks.
Yeah, I still just don't think it's worth having an Oblivion Ring in your main deck. And I think that you can beat out Pestilence. I mean, it's hard. You've got to, I don't know, the way the Pestilence decks plays out, like, it's extremely difficult to remove their Pestilence by not having creatures. So, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I was right. More right than I thought I was. Maybe this is what you want against Pestilence, per se, but like you said, it's fringe enough that you don't need it in your main deck, and if you really think you need it, put it in your sideboard.
I think the number of times that you're gonna want a Journey on turn 2, or you're gonna want that extra mana in a turn, far outnumber the number of Pestilences you get.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Cool. So let's talk a bit about how do we beat this deck. We've already talked about that we think that this is the deck to play if you want to beat up on Skred Delver, which is sort of the boogeyman of the format, I think, at this point. But how do the Skred Delver players beat this deck?
So you can fight their flyers for one. I know that if you bring in Stormbound Geist,
Mm-hmm.
that actually is pretty effective in fighting this deck. They have to spend 2 removal spells or one of their journeys. Hopefully they have one of their journeys if they're playing. If you're the Monarch player, you're hoping you have that. You're hoping you have that, but they have almost all flyers, and you're gonna want to pressure their Monarch. And the best way to do that, like, you're going to want to conserve your life total, and they're going to do that with their flyers. So whatever way you have to deal with flyers, do that.
Yeah. I think that also is important to make a note that you target their flyers, one, so that you can attack with your own flyers, but 2, their ground creatures are not good in combat.
Mm-hmm.
Besides the Monarch guy whose name is now eluding me.
Palace Sentinels. Like, Palace Sentinels can do good things on the ground, but a lot of the times it just blocks and bumps, I think. The fact that it does have 2 power, like, it makes Ninja the Deep Hours really bad, and it's great against, like, the Stompy decks, like against their Burning Tree Emissaries and stuff, but even then they can, throw an Elephant Guide onto their creature and your Palace Sentinels dies. So their creatures on the ground are not very aggressive, and they're not very good at attacking. And so you can kill their flyers and sort of not be worried about ever dying on the swing back to, their Thraben Inspector or their 1 Palace Sentinel, which sort of plays into this dynamic of making it incredibly hard for them to regain the Monarch once you've dealt with their flyers and taken it away. So you can almost just ignore their ground creatures for the most part and just really focus on killing their flyers and pressuring the Monarch. Yeah, not everyone has a way to, like, target flyers specifically, but if you have removal, I would say go for their flyers.
Yeah, if you have removal, kill their flyers and ignore their other creatures.
Then the next way I would say plays into that target their flyers is pressure the Monarch. If you can be aggressive enough with, like, a Rancor, something that'll trample over and steal the Monarch even once, that's like Doomsday scenario for them. They're trying everything to avoid that, and they'll 2-for-1 themselves if they'd have to, just to stop that. So I would say try to go pretty fast so that they can't even play their Palace Sentinels, because most of the time, if they can do that, they will win the game.
Another way of attacking him, I don't know if this is my favorite way to try to do it, but if it's what you got, it's what you got, and that's attacking their artifacts. The artifacts are sort of the fuel of the deck, kind of like what we talked. And if you have Gorilla Shaman, you can, try to color screw them or kill their artifact lands early enough to slow them down for you to get ahead and start attacking them. Put them in a position where they can't just cast Palace Sentinels on turn 4 right away, and they've got to try to play catch up before they can do that. That's one way to sort of gain an advantage over them.
Yeah, they don't rely like entirely on artifacts, but they do enough that it's dangerous to even lose one artifact land. That's pretty tough for them to come back from in just tempo. So that I would say that's the main way that I would go for the. I play a lot of red, so that's the main way I would go for attacking this deck, is blowing up those lands. Not to mention, if you have actual land destruction, hitting their Boros garrison is super tough for them to come back from. A lot of the time they're relying on that to get to the numbers they need.
Yeah, and I think that's just true against any deck, any format. If they have a Ravnica bounce land, if you blow up their bounce land, they're so far behind on tempo that it is very hard to crawl back.
Absolutely. Next, I would say a lot of decks don't have ways to like interact that well. So I would say protect your creatures. Focus on protecting your plan, which also feeds into pressuring the Monarch. If you can protect your creatures so that you can keep getting in whatever way you can, Vines of the Vastwood, Hydroblast, your own prismatic strands, they're gonna fall behind pretty quick, and they're gonna start kind of having to draw cards rather than actually play things to just preserve their life total. I know Hydroblast, I know when I first started playing against this deck, I wasn't sure on whether I should bring in Hydroblast or not, because all of their creatures are white. Maybe I won't find use for this card. No, bringing in a full 4 is a good strategy. It's really their only way that they're going to interact with your creatures, and you'll be able to keep them off of that Monarch.
Yeah, and that was actually a mistake that I made early on when I was learning how to play Scred Delver, was not bringing in the Hydroblasts, because I thought it only counters their Lightning Bolts and their Galvanic Blasts, and I need to be able to kill their creatures and all this. But no, being able to defend your own creatures is very crucial. And any way that you can do that in a 1-for-1 fashion is really important. So Hydroblast is very good. So, and
the last one you wrote on here.
Yeah. So the way this Monarch deck plays, it's a very slow rolling engine. It's just a very slow, incrementally, and it sort of the wheel starts really slow, and then it starts to go faster and faster as the game goes on. So one way to beat it is to kind of just be bigger with your card advantage effects. Monarch is a very slow mechanic. You don't get that card right away. You're not going to be able to use it till the next turn. And if you can do things like cast Mole Drifters, and just have bigger plays than them, you can sort of steal the game away before they're able to snowball out of control. Trying to play 1-for-1 with them in a slow, grindy game, you're going to lose that every time, because they just better. They 1-for-1 you better. All their cards are generating advantage in addition to trading with your cards in a lot of scenarios. And so that's why you want to do things. I think that Mole Drifter is really good in the matchup. You just need to be able to kill Score Skyfisher, of course, but something that Mole Drifter plays into that same core Skyfisher dynamic of this is a threat that you've got to answer, so you've got to spend your own cards on it, but it's also getting me a huge advantage. And that advantage is a lot quicker than the advantages of core Skyfisher and the Monarch. And so I think trying to just be faster than them somehow in terms of you snowballing is probably very important. But
the last point I would want to bring up is play around Electrickery. They're you're not next leveling them by bringing in your Spider Silk armor. You know they're going to do it, and it's just that's a plane that you have to fight on. If you have 3 Spider Silk armors in your sideboard, bring in 3 Spider Silk armors. If you're thinking, oh, the 1 means that they're not going to be able to get me with it, they'll just wait and cast 2. So I think that's a very big card that, don't overextend unless you have protection, Electrickery. It's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the easiest way to lose a game is when you've got, you cast a spell stutter sprite to counter their spell. You have 2 other fairies in play, and they just overload an Electrickery with your spell stutter trigger on the stack. I'm pretty sure you lose that game.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're just dead. So,
by the way, I didn't know this. So when Fairy Miscreant, this is off topic, but when Fairy Miscreant enters the battlefield, it's one of those triggers that it's both when it enters the battlefield and when it resolves, it has to be true.
Yeah, it checks on resolution.
I didn't know that, because I saw someone let it resolve and then they killed his other guy. I had no idea. So anyway, pro tip.
Yeah, I guess I've never had that come up. People always just kill it while it's on the stack, because it just makes more sense to kill it on the stack. I guess also just depending on what you're trying to kill it with, I don't know. You don't want to give them an extra fairy for spell stutter sprites, and
yeah.
So I guess I've just I've never encountered someone waiting for the trigger to go onto the stack.
I think that's why I've never seen it before, is because it never came up, and then
it
came up, and I was just like, what? Anyway, are you ready to move? I think that's everything we've got for Boros Monarch. Do you want to move on to this week's Pauper Challenge breakdown?
Pauper Challenge breakdown.
And I don't know if we've mentioned this before. I think we've alluded to it, but we recorded this whole episode last week.
Yeah.
And I did make a tweet about this, but I made a technical mistake and I lost all of Brandon's audio. I had
make the episode better.
Oh, whatever. So basically what happens is during the week, if I'm trying to record a video, I mute my desktop audio so that I can do things like watch a video or listen to music. And then I went and recorded the show with Brandon, and his audio comes through my desktop, and I lost all of it. So we're re-recording this. So that's why we missed a week. Sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah.
My fault. Anyway, so that's why we're doing the challenge breakdown for the 25th. The results came out on the 26th of March.
Hey, that's today.
Yeah, they came out today.
Not when you're listening. It'll probably be 4 days ago, because
I take forever to edit the show. Yeah.
You're in Futureland.
So for this challenge, I'm going to go down the list real quick here, and then we can go over anything unique that was going on. So number 1, we have Boros Monarch. Number 2, another Boros Monarch. Number 3, Mono Blue Delver. Number 4 is Boros Monarch. Number 5 is Tireless Tribe. Number 6 is Bogles. Number 7 is Blue Delver. And then number 8 is Mono Black Land Destruction.
Whoa! So the first thing that I note about this top 8 is the absence of Scred Delver. There's only the 2 Mono Blue Delver decks, which I think is interesting. And the next big point is 3 Boros Monarch decks. And if I'm remembering correctly, there were at least 2 in last week's Pauper Challenge top 8. So maybe we got a little jumpy about our ban Scred Delver out of the format, and maybe we should just ban Boros Monarch, right?
I think
showing all these great results, so we have to ban it because that's how it works.
I'm ready to back off and say maybe. So the statistics we were going over at the time were pretty
very lopsided in Delver's favor.
Yeah.
But that also could have just been that Delver was the more played deck, and that wasn't as much to do with the fact that it was the most dominant deck.
It was just flavor of the month, and
something that could be very true.
The metagame hadn't shifted to adjust yet, and I feel like this is it did adjust, and Boros Monarch kind of is putting it in its place. And I don't think that it's at a unhealthy level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's fine. And who knows? Maybe next week we'll see a couple of Scred Delver decks back on top. And if we see this I'm all tongue tied. Healthy balance. Somehow that was hard for me to say, but this healthy balance of decks being dominant, where it's going to be Boros Monarch this week, and next week maybe we see a couple more copies of Blue Delver, and then we see Scred Delver again, and then we see something else. That's sort of the ideal world that we want to live in. But
absolutely, yeah, the results we saw, it's I'm super interested to see next month's, at the end of this month, our power rankings.
Yeah, I agree. So should we just skip over all this stuff because it's really nothing interesting until 8th place, and let's just talk about 8th place? I don't think there's much of note in any of these decks.
I'm going super quick. We do have a couple of those Boros Monarchs running Seeker of the Way. That's good to see.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm fine skipping. Yep.
Yeah. The only things in here that aren't Boros Monarch and Blue Delver, we've got 1 Tireless Tribe, 1 Boggles. Those deck lists are always super straightforward in what they're doing.
Almost identical, too.
Yeah, they're very linear. So let's just talk about this Land Destruction deck, because I'm excited about this one.
Sure. Do you want to start in on it, or do you want me to go for it? I'll go for it.
I'm going to start going down it.
Okay.
Go for it then.
Okay, so...
I'll do it.
Okay.
No, you just go.
Okay.
I want to...
No, I'll do it. Shut up.
Okay, you do it. Okay. I'm going to mute myself.
I've seen a lot of mono black land destruction lists, and a lot of the time they'll use Chittering Rats to help mana screw your opponent. This one doesn't have any Chittering Rats. It's got 4 Gurmag Angler, which is stock. And then it's got 4 Dusk Legion Zealot, which is the newish card that is basically a 1/1 for 2 that draws you a card and loses you a life, just as an extra little draw engine that can double as a beater. It also has 3 Thorn of the Black Rose. Usually you don't see these main deck. I think it's a little bit of a bold decision, but I think it feels right. You do need an extra little oomph. The problem that the mono black land destruction deck was having is it ran out of steam. It didn't have a way to close out the game. And I think Thorn of the Black Rose will just overwhelm your opponent in just extra kill spells, extra land destruction spells to keep them locked and for you to win the game. But like the other mono black land destruction decks, this has 4 Dark Rituals. It's got the 4 Sign and Blood, 2 Night's Whisper, and then of course Rancid Earth, Icequake, in 4-ofs, and then a 2-of Befoul. I love Befoul in that it can switch gears and act as a kill spell.
Yeah, I want to jump back to the Night's Whisper Sign and Blood split. Actually, no. Actually, maybe it's not relevant because this whole thing is mono black, so it's probably not relevant. But I was gonna say, like, what is the point of the split? And then I answered my own question by remembering I'm talking about a mono black deck, and Sign and Blood has slight upside to Night's Whisper in that it can target your opponent.
Yeah,
so I don't know that that's gonna get. That probably doesn't come up very much. Where you're just like, man, I really wish I had a shock. Oh wait, I drew Sign and Blood, and you shock your opponent for 2 and they die. But yeah, I answered my question. So moving on.
And by the way, this is running 4 Icequake, so that will punish those snow lands that you're putting in there with no other reason other than aesthetics. And maybe they were at 3, and you can Icequake them down to a 2, and then Sign and Blood them for the kill.
Mono black land destruction burn deck.
Yeah, that's
the name of this deck.
It's strange. I mean, okay, for a removal package, it does have those 2 Befouls, 4 Chainer's Edicts. That's pretty much it as far as creature destruction goes.
That's it, actually.
Yeah, and for a Monarch deck, that is kind of notable, but it's just trying to get out there fast and keep them off of creatures altogether, and have the creatures will just be kind of either non-threats, or you'll throw one of your Dusk Legion Zealots in front of it, I think. Plus, Thorn of the Black Rose has Death Touch.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think, very relevant to note that you have 12 3-mana destroy a land, and you have Dark Ritual. So you can very easily, on the draw, have a play where you just turn 1 Ritual, blow up your land. Turn 2... you make a Night's Whisper, a Sign and Blood, and then turn 3, you blow up a land again. And now your opponent is on 1 land. And then that becomes making Thorn of the Black Rose on the next turn. You're going to have the Monarch for at least 2 or 3 turns after that. And your opponent gets so far behind that they don't catch up to the Monarch. So you're less worried about being able to remove their threats because you're effectively removing them by stranding them in your opponent's hand.
And there's also the kind of... all of their land destruction spells do cost 3 or more. So they're running in the land slots. It's 15 Swamp, 4 Peat Bog, and 2 Barrenmoor. One, I love the Barrenmoor. This deck can get flooded and then just lose control of a game, and the ways it catches up aren't great. So the Barrenmoor really smooths out some of those bad draws. But it has these 4 Peat Bogs. If you're not familiar, it's one of the lands with depletion counters. It enters tapped, and you can tap it to add 2 black mana to your mana pool, and that uses a depletion counter. You only get to use the land twice, and then it goes in your graveyard. It has fantastic synergy with Gurmag Angler, because the second time you tap it for mana, essentially it's tapping for 3 mana for your Gurmag Angler. So you can get that out pretty dang quick. It allows you to turn to one of your Sign and Bloods or something. If you go first, play that tapped, and then turn 2, start blowing up lands. You can lock them out of the game. And I just love how land destruction just gets in your opponent's mind. Of when they're deciding to mulligan, they're like, oh, this is a serviceable hand, but it has 2 land in it. Usually I would be fine with just 2 land, but maybe I need more, or maybe they'll keep a 6-lander and hope to draw more action, and you still keep them from hitting 3 mana because you just keep hitting all your land destruction spells. I just love all of that. That's a value without ever paying a mana.
Yeah. This deck is super spicy fun times, I think. And I'm particularly excited about it because I just built red-green Ponza in Modern. So I'm going to be blowing up lands in that format. Maybe I'll build this deck and blow up lands in Pauper too. So looks super fun. And I always love it when spice like this cracks the top 8, you know? It sort of just shows the versatility of the format, and that people are rewarded for strong gameplay and knowledge of the format. You can play a lot of silly decks and have some cool results, and I think that's great.
I think it shows how that it is actually healthy.
Well, that's the show, everybody.
Yeah, I think that's all we got.
Yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm all worded out, and as much as I like listening to myself talk, I'm kind of talked my ears off already.
So check out our sponsor, puremtgo.com. They're great for sponsoring us, and that's one way to support the show. We have our email, commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com, if you want to contact us about anything. If there's a deck you want us to cover, you disagree with us on something, whatever, we would love to read your email on the show or cover something. And you can find us at, you can find me at Lobbert8 on twitter.com, and I have a YouTube. It's just Lobbert. So go ahead and search that on YouTube. And where can they find you, Brandon?
You can find me on Twitter at bclark_CK. And I guess you can... Did you already say the show? How to get a hold of the show on Twitter also?
No.
Yeah, so you could contact both of us through the show. What is our show's Twitter? Where is it? It's not even on here. It's not even on your show notes.
That's why we've never even talked about it, Brandon.
Have we not?
Never.
You are full of it.
Not
I bet
once.
if we go back to our show notes, we would see it.
No, I copy them every time.
Huh.
I know that our thing retweeted.
Well, the show has a Twitter, so you can follow the show, and we'll tweet things like periodically.
Hold on.
Every once in a while, so you can do that if you want to do that, and it's a thing.
Hold on.
So, and if I could remember the Twitter handle, I would say it.
Hold on. I'm going to do the thing.
I'm waiting for Sean to type it in the show notes so I can read it. At CK Podcast MTG. None of this is getting edited out, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
No! Okay, he's the boss.
Sorry, I'm anal. You can also follow the show at CK Podcast MTG.
I literally just said that.
I hate you so bad.
None of this is getting edited out. Keep it all.
No.
Bye, everybody.
You have no power.
No.
Just let me do it. Said I could do the outro.
Bye, everybody. Auf Wiedersehen. Fare thee well. Goodbye, everyone. See you later, alligators.
You suck so bad.